Hello, welcome back to Kongatsu 1943, and in this episode we will be delving into the causes and implications of the anti-war movements in the United States of America and Australia. We will be covering the movements from World War I in 1914 to the conclusion of the war in Vietnam in 1975. Each war had varying levels of public opinion, with some, like the Second World War, being highly supported by the US public compared to the Vietnamese War, which is highly detested by the public. During the Second World War and Korean War, Australia had a strong anti-nuclear movement in 1945 by the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, after the bombing of Hiroshima and Nagasaki. This movement held minor support throughout the 40s, however, it increased in popularity throughout the 60s and 70s due to the Cold War. Prior to major Australian involvement within the Vietnamese War, there was a collective of anti nuclear protests occurring. During May in 1960, Australia's first campaign for nuclear disarmament, known as CND Group, was formed in Melbourne. This group would contain aspects of the modern Greens Group that still petitioned for the nuclear disarmament period. The Australian public did not want to be involved with the war in Vietnam. However, due to the Australian government having close relations with the United States and the fear of communism thanks to the domino theory, the Petrov Affair, and close geographical location to Vietnam, Australia became involved with the war. Due to this, many Australians believed that the war was unnecessary to be involved with. The Australian government originally sent a group of military advisors to Vietnam to train the South Vietnamese forces, which was not an opposed idea from the public. However, due to the escalation at Tonkin by the US Navy receiving small arms fire from the Viet Cong in international waters, as well as the start of Operation Rolling Thunder, Australia began sending its armed forces to fight in Vietnam with the US. This would cause the Australian government to introduce the National Service Scheme in November of 1964. This meant that young men who were turning 20 had to register their names for a military draft. Due to this, it made the already unwanted war in Vietnam even more detested by the Australian people, as many believed it was unnecessary but still feared the communist threat from the Petrov Affair. Due to this implementation and the aggravated war in Vietnam, it started the Hell No We Won't Go campaign within Australia from 1964 to 1973. Within the US, during World War I, on August 29, 1914, a group of 1,500 women wearing black dresses or black armbands participated in a march down New York City's Fifth Avenue. This peace parade, performed by the women, would be considered as one of the first public anti-war protests in America. Organized by the Women's Peace Party, this would set in motion the first modern protests surrounding the war, not only within the US, but across to its allies, especially Australia, which received a huge amount of influence from the US. In May of 1940, a general vote in the US found that only 7% of Americans believed that the United States should declare war on Germany. However, public opinion began to swiftly change after the fall of France and the Battle of Britain. But, due to the bombing of Pearl Harbor on December 7, 1941, it completely changed American opinions, and only 7% of Americans wanted to stay out of the war at this point. This would be recorded from a countrywide general poll asking Americans if they want to get involved with the war. Representative Jeannette Rankin, who had previously voted against the US involvement in World War I, was the singular vote in Congress against the country entering the war. During the Korean War, the vast majority of the US public agreed with President Truman's decision to lead an international military aid to repel the invasion from the communist North Korea. The main opposition to the Korean War was political. which was mostly due to the fact that the president did not have a formal declaration of war, and because of his decision to fire General Douglas MacArthur over disputes on the strategies and the possibilities of escalating the war. The Vietnam War saw the largest and most organized protests in American history. After the bombing campaign known as Operation Rolling Thunder was issued in escalation, Operation Rolling Thunder was the aerial campaign of the strategic bombing of North Vietnam, the Ho Chi Minh Trail, Laos, and Cambodia. The idea behind it was to starve the communist forces of their resources and manpower, and to force their leaders to sign a peace treaty. The US public opinion began questioning the morality and necessity of the war in Vietnam. The first protests arose within university and college campuses, such as the University of Michigan, Columbia University, Wisconsin University, University of Pennsylvania, Swarthmore College, University of California, and Temple University during the 1965. The students and teachers alike began teach-ins, with anti-war seminars replacing regular classes. Not long after this, protests began to spread to the streets of cities in America, such as the March on the Lincoln Memorial on the 21st of October, 1965. There were as many as 100,000 people attending this rally, with some of these people later fighting with authorities at the Pentagon. After President Richard Nixon had declared that the US would be invading Cambodia on the May 4th, 1970, the same day the Ohio National Guard opened fire on a student protest in Kent State University. This resulted in killing 4 protesters and wounding 9 others. This action would intensify the disdain towards the government and their ability to deal with the protests, as well as sparking multiple countrywide demonstrations. For example, the forced closure of hundreds of colleges and universities for a brief period. A large quantity of returning battlefield veterans from Vietnam joined the protests, and on April 19th to the 3rd of 1971, a rally was staged by the Vietnam veterans against the war, or also known as VOR. In this rally, there would be an estimated 1,000 veterans who would throw their medals and combat ribbons on the steps of the United States Capitol. There would be many significant figures throughout these protests, including civil rights leader Martin Luther King Jr., who publicly declared their opposition for the Vietnam War. Mr. King would state the Vietnam War was a blasphemy against all that America stands for. Due to Mr. King's large popularity already due to the civil rights movement, this persuaded many people of the civil rights movement and other civilians across the world the unjustified US involvement with the war. This would cause despite and upset across the United States and the countries fighting in the war. This would greatly affect how the US would fight conflicts in the future, as they would not be able to continue a war without public support. In conclusion, the war efforts of Australia and the United States in the war post Vietnam era are heavily influenced by the public opinion in support of the war. If not, it would cause huge protests countrywide, applying huge amounts of pressure upon the governments to withdraw the armed forces from combat. The conflict in Vietnam would shape the future of how wars are waged by Western countries and the power of protesting by the public. Thank you for watching this video. Make sure to comment, like, and subscribe.